This video is brought to you by friend of the channel Steel Series. They just refreshed their keyboard lineup for 2023 and the Apex range is now stupidly fast, to the point where the world record for speed typing was just set on an Apex keyboard. You can get 12% off any Apex or any other Steel Series product by using offer code SKILLUP at checkout over at steelseries.com. Click the link below to get to it or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Finally, weeks after returning from my trip to LA, I am now allowed to talk about the third and dare I say best game I played whilst over there, Alan Wake 2. I was invited by Remedy to attend this hands-on event in Los Angeles. They did not cover my flights or accommodation. I paid my own way, and this is in no way a sponsored video, though I suspect it may sound like it at times, given how much I am about to gush about this. For context though, I will say that I'm actually not a Remedy fanboy. I like Remedy games, I really do, but with the exception of Max Payne, they historically haven't connected with me in the same way that they have for others. Control is the perfect example. I liked Control, I did, but I didn't love it. It just didn't do for me what it did for other people. If I was to summarize why, I'd say that there was a huge amount of potential left on the table when it came to that setting. You could feel the oldest house had so much more to give, but I think Remedy were more interested in the air of mystery rather than the revelations that might come when something is no longer mysterious. That is all by way of saying that I wanted Control to be more weird, and let me tell you, having spent nearly 3 hours with Alan Wake 2, Alan Wake 2 is fucking weird, and I absolutely love it. My hands-on time was divided into 2 sections. The first was playing as Saga. She's the new co-protagonist, an FBI agent sent to a swampy backwater to investigate the activities of a mysterious cult. We then broke for a briefing from Remedy, giving us a setup for the next block, which is where we got to play as the man himself, Alan Wake, trapped in a heavily stylized version of New York City, making his way through a hotel where something very unpleasant had gone down, or will go down, depending on how we write the story, but we'll come back to that in a bit. I've been to probably, I don't know, more than 100 hands-on previews to this point. It's very rare for any preview to smack you across the face as hard as this one does. For real, from the very second I loaded in, I was totally hooked. The setting and setup for Saga's tale was the playable true detective experience I'd always wanted. The combat was tense and nail-biting, leaning into classic survival horror while also feeling faster and more actiony, similar to something like Resident Evil 4 almost. The mind room where you advance your casework and unpack new clues is such an inspired choice, and it was always so exciting to return there with new evidence in hand. The smash cut to New York City was, oh man, like, wait until you see how good this city looks. The sheer power of the art design on display here is overwhelming. It is the noir fantasy that no other game to this point has been able to deliver, bringing absolutely cutting-edge visual presentation that I genuinely believe will shock people. I do not think people are ready for how good this game looks. Remedy have hyped up this game's visuals a lot, and I do not think they were lying. What really made Alan Wake 2 sing though was just how Remedy it was. They've said on many occasions now that this is the most Remedy they have ever been, embracing all of their weirdness and their connected universe, their characters and performers from previous games, and the way they merge live action and in-game cutscenes and gameplay. This just feels so creative in a way that precious few AAA games do. I know the line is kind of played out now, but this feels like capital C cinema. It takes risks, it isn't constrained by format or expectations, and it has the unmistakable fingerprints of auteur all over it. To play it is to not only play it, but also to enter into a dialogue with Remedy about how they write characters, how they build meta-narratives, how they make games. Nobody makes games quite like Remedy does, and while that hasn't always clicked for me in the past, I'm all but certain that Alan Wake 2 is going to make a die-hard Remedy fanboy out of me yet. Just a quick note before we begin, this preview definitely contains some minor spoilers, nothing that will ruin any of the more impactful plot conclusions, but I do talk about some setup stuff here. If you want to go into Alan Wake 2 completely blind, then I recommend not watching this or any other video. My hands-on time began here in the town of Watery. The game certainly has an overarching storyline involving Saga, Alan Wake and their connection, but the game also seems to be structured around cases, at least for Saga. I could see that a number of cases had already been resolved at this point in my playthrough, and at this point I was now on the hunt for something called the Cult of the Tree, a group of people who wear creepy deer masks and do, creepy cult shit. The locals don't seem too fussed about them, but for Saga on the hunt for a missing FBI agent, the cult is a prime suspect worth exploring. Watery is not much, it's just a sleepy little town with residents milling about, helplessly watching the time slip away.
Hey, where is the time gone? There's just a wretched husk of what used to be me left.
Watery is a lakeside, fog-addled town. That static nature gives you plenty of time to soak up its rich visual detail. The soiled wood grain of its shacks, the rusted fuel drums piled high, the unkempt foliage, the dry dock trawlers, and so on. It feels very lived in and also very safe, so much so that the local geriatric community visits to make use of the sauna on offer, but they seem a little more excited about other forms of liquid therapy.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for Ati to wrap up his show so we can crack open some beers.
I've read that taking a sauna is good for preventing dementia.
Yeah, and so is beer.
My goal at this point is to find information about a caravan trailer, and eventually I bump into these fine gentlemen. This is where shit starts to get really weird. Saga has never been here before, at least not to her knowledge, and yet these guys definitely know who Saga is.
If this is your way of getting out of any outstanding bills, don't worry, they've been handled. Must be hard coming back to where you and your little girl lived.
Saga is really confused by this, and so she retreats to her mind place. This is done with the press of a button. It is instantaneous. There is not a second of loading screen. You press that button and you are just straight away there. The mind place is the physical manifestation of the problem solving that an FBI detective might go through when they're working through a case. It's where you plot evidence on the evidence board, drawing links to find your next steps. It's where you can review previously collected evidence to see what you might have missed. And it's also where you can engage in what's called profiling. Here you can see Saga explore the psyche of her subjects. It's not evidence-based per se, it's more vibes, but it does showcase new dimensions to these characters while allowing Saga to reach breakthroughs that move events forward.
Laughter and love will guide you home. Saga and her daughter. Oh boy. Happy faces raise property value. Family comes first, Yoma. We take care of her trailer while she's gone. She's one of us, Yakko. Her spare key is safe and sound.
The brothers tell me that the trailer I'm looking for is just on the other side of this creepy-ass swamp. Thanks, boys. It's around this time that I get into my first combat encounter with the teleporting zombie-esque foes known as the Taken. So, combat in the last Alan Wake game? Not great at all. Halfway between action and survival horror without committing to either, way too many meaningless enemy encounters, controls that felt sloppy. A lot of people loved Alan Wake, but absolutely no one loved it for the combat. No one. Totally different story here. This is very clearly a survival horror game with fewer enemies, limited ammo, and the need to make every shot count. You still need to shine your high beam torch on them to break their darkness shield, at which point they become vulnerable to regular ammo, but the controls are tight, Saga is responsive, weapon feedback is excellent, and the time it takes for that reticle to shrink creates the perfect balance between frantic reactionary fire versus slower, more considered marksmanship. This was one of only about half a dozen enemies I faced in this hour-and-a-half long segment, which I think really tells you where Remedy are hoping to dial things in. This is a survival horror game, it does have combat, but combat is arguably the least important part of this overall package. The Alan Wake segment coming up definitely had more combat, but even then, it wasn't the focus. This is a narrative-led survival horror game. It is less about fighting your way through and more about figuring out what's going on. In that vein, you should expect plenty of puzzles, and while they aren't Enigma level, they aren't face roll either. There were 3 puzzles I had to work through during my Saga segment, and each of them had me stumped for at least a little bit. I had to sit there, take stock of my surroundings, think laterally, and eventually the solutions came, but the Remedy staff did tell me that more than a few people needed some help to get past them, so don't expect a free ride. With the woods clear, I arrived at the next location, an abandoned amusement park in the middle of a swamp. What was it called? Coffee World. For real, Remedy's commitment to the Twin Peaks inspired coffee bit is so strong that not only is your save point a cup of coffee, but there's an actual coffee themed theme park complete with rides called stuff like the Percolator and the Espresso Express. As clever as the theme was, it was really the visual design and technical detail that stood out to me here. I was playing on an i9 RTX 4090 4K resolution, DLSS on, and ray tracing on as well. The game does support ray trace reflections, transparency, spot contact shadows, indirect diffuse, debris, and sunlit shadows. This preview wasn't the best showcase for a lot of those options, but the lighting in certain parts of Coffee World certainly made good use of volumetric fog to make the air around you feel thick, and it added huge amounts of presence to landmarks like the Ferris wheel or the Percolator. The rest of what I played was actually a secret. It contains some plot details that Remedy asked us not to show or share. But yeah, man, it gets weirder and cooler, and the cliffhanger it ended on was awesome. And yeah, I was just so into this already, but little did I know, I hadn't really seen anything yet.
How mad can you get? He said, looking knowingly at the camera. I could sense the cult of the word.
The payphone was ringing again. The mystery caller was back at it. I had to find out more.
When I first loaded into this city, I literally said to myself, what the fuck? I was looking around being like, how does this game look this good? I mean, in hindsight, I shouldn't have been too surprised. Remedy have always been at the cutting edge of visual presentation and technology from as far back as the Max Payne days. Quantum Break was also very ambitious in its presentation and its time-bending mechanics, which resulted in some spectacular scenes. Control was an art direction powerhouse, the brutalism of the oldest house striking in its own right, but elevated further by the most ambitious implementation of ray tracing tech for its time. That was the ray tracing benchmark until Cyberpunk came along, and it's easy to forget just how much work Remedy put into technology, given how art house a lot of their output ends up feeling. But if it's graphics and presentation that you are after, then holy shit, feast your eyes on Alan Wake 2. This rendition of New York City is staggeringly detailed. The amount of ground clutter, the texture detail, the lighting, my god, this lighting, from the subtle fill of streetlights to the pulsing red of a cop siren to the buzzing neon of the signage, it's just unbelievable. I mean, just look at this alleyway, just look at this. What the fuck, Remedy? This lighting really matters because of the genre of these Alan Wake portions of this game. This is classic film noir. This is Remedy's Sam Lake playing the role of Alex Casey, the hero that Alan Wake is writing, and he's a hard-boiled cop in a hard-boiled city. It's streetlights and steamy vents and Art Deco hotels and black and white storytelling and all the tropes we see from time to time across films and comics, but almost never in video games. For real, I think the last major noir-style game that was released was The Wolf Among Us back in 2013. That is a decade ago. This is not a visual style or genre often explored in video games, but we are not only getting it here in Alan Wake, but we are getting an extraordinary rendition of it. But the visuals are only one part of what makes this sequence so impressive. The other thing that really stood out was just how much further Remedy were willing to take the whole author conceit. So for anyone unfamiliar with the overall setup of Alan Wake is a fictional character who is heavily inspired by Stephen King, the author of horror thrillers like The Shining, It, Misery, and scores more. In the game, Alan Wake essentially becomes trapped in his own imagination. A dark presence uses the fiction that he writes to create a new horrific reality, and the only way that Alan can escape this nightmare is, ironically enough, to keep writing, simultaneously feeding the beast new material to contort, while hoping that the next page he pens will be the one that writes him out of this unique madness. Alan Wake 2 takes this author setup to a whole new level that radically reshapes the way both you and Alan write this story as you go. So you know how Saga has her mind space where she collects evidence and profiles suspects? Well, Alan has his mind space too. You can enter it at any time, and the main thing here is the plot board. This is where you're able to combine both locations and plot points to advance the story. It's a little tricky to understand until you do it for yourself, but here's the gist. As you explore, you'll find various locations like a hallway or a hotel room or a ballroom or whatever, and Alan will remark them and be like, "This location feels important." At that moment, it becomes a location that you can plot on your plot board. At the same time, Alan is uncovering clues about what took place in those locations. So he might hear about a rehearsal or a dinner or a ritual sacrifice, and those become plot points that could play out in those locations. I can combine any plot point with any location, so I can say that the ritual sacrifice took place in a hotel room or in the ballroom, and both of these options will advance the story in some way, but only one of them is the correct sequence of events. So what's happening here is that you as the player are writing the story in the way that Alan talks about. You are not just a voyeur watching him go through it, you are just as much an author as Alan is, and it lets you experiment with different locations and scenes to reveal new angles of the unfolding story. It is so clever, Remedy are goddamn geniuses, and when this whole thing clicks, it makes each newly discovered location or plot point feel so alive with possibility. This part of the demo also had a lot more combat than Saga's section, as well as different enemies. These were shadows, and they were so interesting because some of them you had to shoot, while others you could just kind of spray with your flashlight and they dissipate, but you never knew which was which. At certain points you were kind of surrounded by these things, but the intention was not to fight them. They were almost like environmental obstacles that needed to be navigated more than anything else. Regardless, they were super creepy and they reminded me of those hell demons from the movie Ghost. The other thing I'll say is that the streets of New York City are kind of like a hub area that you return to throughout the game. I started wandering around and finding all sorts of stuff that I shouldn't have before a Remedy person tapped me on the shoulder and explained to me that by this point, Alan would have walked these streets multiple times and will do so again many times throughout the rest of the game. The New York City that you see here is not a one and done level, but rather a place that connects the rest of the game's main areas. Between this incredible visual presentation, this more ambitious use of the author conceit, this ability to shape the story as you go, as well as the unmistakably noir feeling of this whole package, I just couldn't get enough of this. Remedy have said publicly that this game will run for around 20 hours, making it one of the longest survival horror games ever, second only to Alien Isolation, I think. It's hard to maintain tension for that long, but I spent around 3 hours playing this, and it felt like 30 minutes. A 20-hour survival horror game is a long shot bet, but honestly this preview gave me every reason to be optimistic that Remedy will be able to pull it off. So at the top of this preview, I was going on about how Alan Wake is weird and it has that signature Remedy feel about it in every moment. It's really hard to showcase that here because a lot of those unique flares are either spoilers, or they're things that you should experience for yourself, or they're things that can't really be explained or showcased. Like, how do you fully explain what makes a Kojima game a Kojima game? You can list a whole bunch of stuff, sure, but a lot of it is the sealant that fills the gaps. There were so many little lines of dialogue from characters that would catch on your ear, so many quirky radio or television clips that felt part of some insane meta-narrative. There were musical numbers and live-action sequences and references to other Remedy games and so much more stuff just in this 3-hour slice alone. All of it either subtly or overtly reminded you that you aren't just playing another survival horror game, you are playing a Remedy game with their fingerprints all over it. It's weird to phrase it this way, but so few games impart a sense of authorship, the feeling that a group of humans made a thing, leaving their very human mark on it. Alan Wake 2, rather ironically I suppose, has that sense of authorship in spades, and while I think previous Remedy titles have been more niche in their appeal, I think the sheer force of personality, creativity, imagination, and technical wizardry on display here in Alan Wake 2 will send this one right over the top. This feels like the moment Remedy have long waited for and long deserved, and yeah, if the final product is as good as what I experienced here, I think Alan Wake is going to blow people away. SteelSeries. If you've been around these parts for a while now, you've probably seen them. Channel partner 3 years running, SteelSeries put out the absolute best PC peripherals on the market, full stop. Keyboards, headsets, mice and more, whatever SteelSeries puts out, they aim to dominate that category, and they always manage to pull it off. Their range of keyboards is a perfect example. Their Apex lineup comes in a range of different form factors, from full-size to mini, cable to wireless, with plenty of switch types to choose from as well. Separate from their top-tier design and reliability, what really sets the Apex lineup apart is the speed. SteelSeries developed their own proprietary tech called OmniPoint 2.0, which utilizes magnets to produce the most responsive keys you've ever pressed. When you press or depress, you want that to register immediately, and that is exactly what OmniPoint 2.0 enables. But SteelSeries just took things even further. A new firmware update deployed just this month that adds a new feature called Rapid Trigger. It's a little tricky to explain, but here's the gist. Most keyboards use a binary on or off type approach when it comes to keys being pressed or depressed. If you don't lift your finger off the key enough, then the keyboard will think you're still pressing it, which means that you can't press it again. SteelSeries Rapid Trigger does away with all of that, registering even the slightest depress immediately, allowing new inputs to be registered even faster. If that's too technical, let me put it this way. This is the fastest, most responsive keyboard on the market today, full stop, to the point where the world touch typing record was just broken on an Apex keyboard. Monkey Type hit 300 words per minute for the first time in history, and they did it on an Apex Pro, the very keyboard I am using at home. That's classic SteelSeries, to be honest. Whatever they do, they want to do it the best, and they've done it yet again here with their Apex refresh. If you want to grab one of these for yourself or any other SteelSeries product, then head over to steelseries.com and use offer code SKILLUP to get 12% off your order, no strings attached. That's 12% off with offer code SKILLUP at steelseries.com. Thanks SteelSeries for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.